you'll notice that they're dry, okay? And that is because watercolor, the name is a little bit deceptive. With watercolor, the color is dry until you add water to it. So we'll have to do that. Now, before we even do that, make sure you have a paper towel or a napkin or a rag on hand. You always need one of these when working with watercolor, and I'll explain why as we go. So when we use watercolor, you can get 3 different tones out of the same color, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So let's work with purple. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of water and I'm going to add it to my purple. I don't even really need to touch it much. Add it to my purple. And the first technique we're going to do is called wet on wet. And what wet on wet means is that if I want my color to be very light, I'm going to wet my paper first before there is even any type of paint on my brush. And then I'm going to make my paint very wet, but I'm not going to stir it very much. I'm just going to tap it a little bit. And when I add that to the wet paper, it will spread out very thin and very light. Okay, so again, I wet my paper first, and then I add very, very diluted paint. That means there's lots of water in it to that area to make it very, very light. And if I want it even lighter, I can always take my paper towel and I can gently, we never want to rub because that'll rub a hole in the paper, but if I just gently blot it like this, I can pull up a little more and I can make it even lighter. And I could even add a little bit of water to it if I want to spread it out. Okay, so that's wet on wet. Wet on dry means that my paper is dry, but my water is the same as when I do, my paint is the same as when I do wet on wet. So that'll give you kind of a medium tone. And you notice when I brush onto the paper, I'm being gentle. I'm going back and forth to maintain control over my brush and over my paint. If I'm too crazy with it, it'll go everywhere, and also it'll ruin the brush. And I could also get a hole in my paper. So that'll give me a nice medium tint. That's called wet on dry. That means my paint is very wet. I haven't stirred it a lot. It's just water kind of sitting on top. And it's on dry paper. My last one is dry on dry. And the reason that that's in quotations is because it's wet. It's wet paint. We're making it wet. So it's not really wet. I mean, it's not really dry. Sorry. It's just that I am going to stir my paint very gently. I'm not pressing this metal part. If you notice, there's no paint all the way up at my metal part. I'm not pressing it all the way down in. I'm just swirling the tip of it over and over again in my paint. And that will make the paint concentrate in the water. And I can get a very dark tone out of that. So that is dry on dry. I have dry paper and my paint is very concentrated. So you can see I can get 3 very different effects with the same color. And that goes for all of the colors. Now I'm going to rinse my brush out. And the way you can tell that your brush is all the way rinsed out is if you use your paper towel. And if there's I have a little bit of purple left on there. I want to make sure I rinse it a little bit more because if I switch colors, I don't necessarily want to mix the colors. Now, if your palette is like mine and there are some dirty spots, that's an easy fix. You just add a little water to it. So like this orange, I'm going to add some water to it. I'm going to swirl a little bit. I'm going to rinse my brush and do it again. And sometimes that'll take care of it. If it still looks a little muddy, you can always take your paper towel in and again, blot it off too. And that'll take the dirty off the top. Okay, so don't think you can't use it just because it mixes a little bit. All right, instead of going smooth back and forth, I'm just gonna kind of dab it like this. And then I'm going to go back with green, and I don't have to wash my brush out too much with this because remember, yellow is a part of green, right? Yellow and blue makes green. So it's not a big deal if the yellow mixes with the green. And then I can go back. And I'm not pushing really hard. I'm not pushing so hard that this bends all the way. It's just the tip of my brush. And I can mix it in more. But remember, we don't want to mix it so much that we can't see two different colors anymore. So I still can see that some of those areas are yellow. Now at a distance, this will just look like green, different shades of green. If you decide you want some of it darker and some of it lighter, you can use different wet on wet or dry on dry techniques. This is kind of a wet on dry. Now that being said, you have to think about your colors when you put them next to each other like this, because certain colors, if they mix together, will look like brown or gray. So if you have your complementary colors, if you think back to elementary school when we talk about complementary colors, which are purple and yellow, red and green, okay, orange and blue, they look so good next to each other, but when they mix together, they make kind of a brown, okay, or a gray. So you want to be very careful when you have those next to each other. I'm not saying you can't have them next to each other. You just have to be more careful with your technique and make sure they don't blend very much, okay? So let's do one more color. Let's go with, let's do purple and red. Okay, so I'm going to take some purple and I'm going to do some of my blotches. Again, gentle. If you want to do more dashes like this, that's okay too. Some of the painters did kind of brush strokes like this instead of more dots. That's okay too. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse this time because my red actually, purple is not a part of red, but red is a part of purple. So I'm going to take a little red. I'm going to add my dashes in between there. And again, remember, red is a part of purple. So if they overlap a little bit, that's okay. Remember, purple is a secondary color when you mix red and blue together. So if the primary color, right, the primary colors are blue, red, and yellow. If those two primary colors make your color, you don't have to worry about them blending together and making a funny color. Now, our last technique is erasing the watercolor. You might think, oh, I have an eraser. No, we're not actually erasing anything. So I'm going to take a pretty dark purple. Okay, and you might think, oh my gosh, that's so dark, I can never get it off. Well, sometimes you can't get watercolor off all the way, but you can at least get it off enough so that you can cover it up with whatever color you wanted. So say you get a color in a place you don't want it, or it's just too dark, okay? A simple fix for that is to add water to it. I'm just gonna dab on it a little bit. Okay, I'm not rubbing a whole lot because remember we want to protect our paper. And then I'm just going to, again, dab. There's a lot of dabbing going on in watercolor. And that takes most of it off for the first round. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to put water back on. Okay. And this time I'm not going to rub a whole lot, but I'm just brushing very gentle back and forth. And then I'm going to dab it again. Again, no rubbing. That will take it up enough so that even if I go over it with a color like yellow, which is the lightest color on here, it's not bad. I can still get it on here. And it doesn't make that much of a difference. And remember, purple and yellow are complementary colors. So if they mix together, they're pretty rough. And here, you have a slight tint, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, so those are your watercolor techniques.